Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of A Mic on the Podium with me, Michael Seal. Before we start, I want to thank my latest Patreon subscribers, Emma and Lawrence, for their support, and all my Patreon subscribers for their continued support. This podcast would struggle to continue without them, and my Patreon page has become a great place to learn about and to chat about all aspects of conducting. There'll be more about my Patreon page later on in this episode. Today, I conduct a conversation with an American conductor who can count Leonard Bernstein, Michael Tilson Thomas, and Sir Simon Rattle, among others, as being his teachers and mentors. He's possibly best known as being the Professor of Conducting at the University of Music and the Performing Arts in Vienna since 2004. It's a pleasure to welcome Mark Stringer. Mark, it's wonderful to see you, to speak with you. I would say meet with you, but we met, a million years ago when I was a player and you were assisting with the CBSO. But how are you?
I'm doing as well as one can be in the current COVID conditions. Generally, I'm doing really well. Also emotionally, right now we are recording it in a week where Austria is beginning to shut down completely, and with the whole travel bans with the new variant and stuff like that. So I have a sort of Groundhog Day feeling right now, which I'm having to deal with. The whole question of how are any of us getting through the earthquake in our profession that the COVID crisis has presented to us, and the fact that just as we think, okay, there's light at the end of the tunnel, we're getting out of this, boom, back to square one. And so this is a little bit tricky for me to deal with at the moment, but in general terms, as any Brit would have asked me, and I'm being very American in my response, I'm taking your question seriously. Yes, I'm doing fine.
Mark, I do my homework. I go to Wikipedia. I've gone to your website. I know exactly where you studied, even who you studied with, but I don't know what instruments you play and when music first came into your life. When did music come into your life? Are you from a musical family, or did it just appear out of the blue in your family?
No, I'm a freak in my they don't know where I came from in my family. My family has always been music lovers, but not musicians. When did I get into music? At a really seriously early age, maybe. My mother tells the story of, and I remember it vividly, but when I was about 2 or 3 years old, I heard the Tchaikovsky 1812 probably on the radio. And I pestered her to get me that record. I called it the Boom Boom record. I mean, I'm ashamed that what didn't impress me was Tchaikovsky's counterpoint or anything like that. It was the canons at the end. Yeah. But I wanted to have that record, and I remember getting it, and I remember the house that I was in when I got it for my birthday. So that meant I could not have been older than 3 years old. It started there. By the time I was 5 or 6, I could parrot all the words in Magic Flute, because the second record I pestered my mother to buy was the 1951, I think, Carl Böhm Magic Flute. And I listened to it so ad nauseum that I could parrot all of the words, having no idea what they meant, but I could do the sounds. And I had a good enough ear that I could sing them on pitch. And so before my voice changed, one of my party tricks was to sing the second Queen of the Night aria.
Wow.
So I was a freak of nature. And so by the time I was 5 or 6 years old, I started piano lessons. That's my main instrument. I must have always known I wanted to be a conductor. There is a portrait of me when I think I was 3 or 4 years old. My mother commissioned a portrait of the kids, my sister and my brother, and my dog at the time. And she insisted that the painter paint me with a stick in my hand, because I was always going around as a toddler with a stick in my hand, waving my arms. Again, she should have sought a psychiatrist. And instead, she did the next smartest thing. She got me piano lessons. And where I will, to my dying breath, honor my parents. My mother's still living. My father passed almost exactly a year ago. Where I will, to my dying breath, honor my parents is they did not know anything about music or the music profession, but they sensed that this was something I loved and was obsessed by, and they sought out the people who did know about the music profession in Atlanta, Georgia, where I wound up growing up, sought out the people who knew what to do with me. And instead of just sending me to the local piano teacher and then, that's a nice hobby, but you're going to be a lawyer, you're going to be a musician, you're going to be a football player. They sought out the people who knew what to do with someone like me. And one of the first things they did was got me, since I seemed to have a voice and could carry a tune, I'm completely on pitch, put me into a boy choir, the Atlanta Boy Choir, who had an amazing conductor who taught us about self-discipline, about the discipline of the profession, about the discipline of learning music, instilling me to this day the fanatical obsession with being on time, ending on time, planning a rehearsal, learning your parts before you go in, all these professions. And we're talking about an 8-9-year-old child. I was in this choir from maybe 8 years old to 14 years old when my voice broke. International tours, international recordings. There's somewhere in the world a blackmail copy of me singing the alto solo to Schubert's Ständchen for alto solo and male choir, which was recorded in I think it's Casino Borgensiel. I forget which there's a casino here in Vienna, which is used as a recording studio. All of Harnoncourt's cantatas were recorded in that recording studio. And so among the many things I did when I was 12 years old, I came to Vienna on a international tour and made a recording, that time vinyl LP, of Schubert songs, including the Ständchen. So someone has a copy of that. I'm sure my mother has.
I'll find it and drop it. Yeah, I'll find it and drop it into the podcast.
There's enough YouTube blackmail material on me as this conducting student to plague me for the end of my days. They sought out the music director of the Atlanta Symphony, Robert Shaw, the great, amazing, legendary choral conductor. When I was old enough to be in touch with them, they got me in touch with the people who knew what to do with me. And bless their hearts, in that way they supported me in the smartest way they could. They didn't interfere, and they would drive me from gig to gig and from lesson to this and that and that. And so there were violin lessons, there were bass, there were trumpet lessons, but mainly piano. I was already as a teenager making a nice little bit of side income, which they appreciated. By that point, when I was in my later teens, 16, 17, 18 years old, I had a reputation in Atlanta as being someone who could basically sight read anything at the piano and could play fast and knew enough about languages and about singing that especially singers and choruses loved to have me work with them. But there was also lots of chamber music I was doing. I was basically slave labor for a lot of Atlanta musicians. And I soaked it up because I came to Juilliard at the age of 17 in the conducting studies. I came to Juilliard at 17 with just a sort of already a knowledge of chamber music repertoire, lead repertoire, symphonic repertoire. One of the things I would do as a teenager, the Atlanta Symphony had at that time a program where volunteers could volunteer as ushers at the symphony concerts and then be allowed to watch the concerts for free. And I did that for many years. And boy, that introduced me to so many pieces. The Azrael Symphony, which has become a big piece of my repertoire, heard for the first time there. Many of the Brahms symphonies. I still have my copy of the Dover Brahms symphonies autographed by Claudio Bado in the backstage of the Atlanta Symphony. This was just, my parents put me in the right spot to become the person I've become. And I could have so easily gotten the wrong teacher and burned out, or I could have not developed a talent. Steve Sondheim, rest in peace. There's a quote of his that everyone is born with a talent, not everyone develops it.
Yes.
So they just allowed me to develop it to the point that I was just good enough. I had been accepted into Leon Fleischer's or Anne Rice's program a piano program at Peabody Institute when I was in my senior year. And I auditioned and I was accepted for the piano department of William Masellos at Juilliard as a pianist, but I just took the dive and auditioned for the conducting program at 17 years old. I'd never been in front of an orchestra other than my high school orchestra. I remember, and the program was Brahms 3 and Stravinsky Firebird. And what I remember is the Brahms 3, raising my stick up like I saw every other conductor do. And I had looked at Robert Shaw's George Zell influenced score and copied everything down. You remember him, and
yes,
and how all of his parts were micromanaged to the nth degree. And I copied all of those markings into my score. And so I raised my, probably I even tapped my stick, who knows, doing what I thought a conductor should do. And I was noticing in Brahms 3 first movement, 17 years old, no business conducting that piece, but 17 years old. Brahms 3, raised everyone up, and the trombones are sitting back in their stools with their instruments down. And so I give them a maestronic, glaring look. Get your instruments up, And I start, and as I give the upbeat and I look down at the sky, I say, oh my word, the trombones don't play until the third measure. Oh, how embarrassing. I've never made that mistake ever again. But what my eventual teacher at Juilliard said, I was finding misprints in the Stravinsky Firebird that no one else had heard, including all the famous conductors, had not corrected these parts. And I was hearing a lot of misprints to the point that he asked me, can you please go on? It's really impressive, but can you please go on? And he said, that's what got me in. That he noticed that I had an ear.
And who was that teacher at Juilliard?
Okay, Juilliard had a schizophrenic program where half of the time we were with Sixten Ehrling, and half of the time we were with an American-Mexican / conductor, George Mester, Jorge Mester. An amazing pedagogue, an amazing American conductor, very famous for all the recordings of modern music that he did with the Louisville Symphony. And I'm now at an age where I'm older than he was when he was teaching at Juilliard. So I'm looking back and saying, oh, that's how it felt. And that's what we seemed like as students. Oh, how annoying I must have been. And so George was very much on the psychology of rehearsal, the planning of rehearsal, how to be professional, things to think about. Sixten Ehrling was much more about the technique and about how to study a score and see misprints and structure a score, a very Kapellmeister school. So between the two of them, I wound up completely without any technique at all because it was so schizophrenic. It really, it was like a child who has a bilingual parents, they can change language in the middle of a sentence up to a certain age. And not notice that they've changed. Well, that was us at Juilliard. We would walk into the room on any given day, see which teacher was in the room, and then become that conductor.
Yeah.
We just learned how to be good minds. And I wound up with a lot of repertoire. Juilliard had its own orchestra just for the conductors, as Vienna does. That's what I appreciated about Vienna. Vienna has an orchestra just for the conductors to work on in-house. We don't have to go outside at all. And so my students and I at the Juilliard wound up with repertoire for ages, which has served me endlessly ever since. There's so much repertoire that I can still remember. Oh, I remember that as a student. Now I can start building on that maybe bad experience. But at least by the time I was 20 years old, I had conducted 5 of the Mahler symphonies and most of the Beethoven symphonies and all of the Brahms symphonies.
Wow.
And that's because of the program at Juilliard, and of course badly. And none of this I had any business conducting, and A lot of pieces burned me, and I will never in my life ever, for $1 million, conduct the Mozart 39th Symphony in E flat major. I was so burned by my first experience at Juilliard that I break out into a sweat when I have to teach it in front of the students. I have to deal with it because I just have a sort of primal reaction to it. There are a couple of those pieces that I just never want to come back to.
What a luxury for you to have an orchestra.
Tell me about it.
And not just the two pianos.
And so many of my colleagues don't have this luxury. They can't even imagine what it's like to have an in-house orchestra.
And at what point did you do what we all have to do as pupils, which is try and assimilate whether Erling's approach was good, whether Jorge Mester's approach was good, and which bit to take from which to form a Mark Stringer? When did you do that? Was that over a long period of time, or did you? I would say
it's a long period of time, and much longer, because two things happened in between. Shall I say, leaving Juilliard and what I say having a career was coming into the realm of simultaneously, I would say, a little bit. First, Michael Tilson Thomas was maybe the first seriously major conductor to notice me, take me under his wing. Stanislav Skrobaczewski was mentoring me, but I was at that point not really too young and dumb to really be cognizant of how amazing a figure he was at my disposal. But so sweet, learned so much about Berkman from him. But Tilson Thomas took me under his wing, and then very shortly after that, Leonard Bernstein took me under his wing. And then about 5 years later, when Bernstein died, sort of Simon immediately stepped in at Tanglewood and took me under his wing. And so I was, in the years other conductors would be finding themselves, I was in the position of melding my ego into these enormous musical figures who were, I knew at the time, and I was warned by Bernstein's agent, watch out, this will happen to you. It's a Faustian bargain. When you're going under the wing of these massive musical giants in the profession, that you will not be able to offer anything really on their level. So it won't be a 50-50, it's a 90-10. And you will be just sucked into their musical persona.
Yeah.
On the other hand, what one would learn from that musical persona at like 2 meters away from the face of the sun. Yes, you're going to get burned, but you're going to feel a heat and a light that no one else experiences. It is a Faustian bargain. So in those years where other people were finding themselves, I was losing myself. And on the advice of Sir Simon, who saw this happening, he said, get out of America, go to Europe, find someplace isolated where they don't care what big conductor X and Y did. They just want you to deliver a job. Go to this isolated place, disappear for the next 5 years, find out exactly, as you say, find out who Mark Stringer is, and then let us rediscover you. So that was me moving to Bern in Switzerland. One of my Juilliard colleagues had become, Andreas Dels, had become the chief conductor at the Opera House, and invited me along as a Kapellmeister for the ride. And substitute music director, and I had all sorts of titles there. But basically learn from scratch what works for Mark Stringer. And that's where I found out what worked from Mester, as you say, what worked from Mester. A lot worked from Erling. Boy, that prepared me in a way I was not prepared for, expecting. That prepared me for the opera pit, the Kapellmeister training. That worked with the orchestra. And anything emotive in the way that I had gotten from Bernstein totally no reaction from the orchestra.
Mm.
It's not that it didn't work. It got nothing from the orchestra.
Wow.
Because it wasn't me.
Yes,
it wasn't me. It was me imitating someone that I thought I would be.
Yeah.
I hadn't found where my gut was and how to express it in my way. I also hadn't found the composers that appealed to me. I was doing the composer that appealed to Simon, or to appeal to Bernstein, or appealed to Tilson Thomas. But the pieces where I said, well, actually, I like Bruckner a lot more than I like Mahler.
Mm.
And that's where I began to, especially with Schubert and Bruckner, were the pieces where I thought, okay, these pieces I know how to do.
Mm.
The composer that Bernstein noticed me, and to this day, it's like falling off a log, would be Copland.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Bernstein saw me the first time, and he said he'd known me for many years, but he said the first time I saw you was when you were conducting the Third Symphony of Copland. And then he thought, oh, this is special enough for me to pay attention to. And so I began to find the composers that I had something to say about, as opposed to repeating what Simon, or repeating what Bernstein, or repeating what Tilson Thomas told me.
Yeah. So can I ask the current Mark Stringer, who's a little bit older than me? I looked at you, you're the same age as my wife. Can I ask the current Mark Stringer if he could go back to the young Mark Stringer and talk to him about the Faustian bargain you've just mentioned? Would you say to him, Mark, go for it, or would you say to him, Mark, don't go for it, or somewhere in the middle? What would you say to the young Mark Stringer in his early 20s?
Oh yeah, I mean, trust me, I have dealt with this almost obsessively ever since. If given the option, would I repeat it? For all the negative things, the way that it almost radioactively burned me in many ways. I think I would probably tell the young Mark Stringer, calm down and take the razor blades off of your elbows and stop being a blithering idiot and stop pushing so hard and being so miserable because you don't think you belong to be where you are. Stop that. Just calm down. Your talent will get you where you are going to go. Would I reject the first masterclass with Tilson Thomas and then the subsequent jobs assisting him that he gave me? I would hope no, but I wouldn't reject it. I would do the Faustian bargain again, but I would hope maybe if I could give my older brain to the younger Mark Stringer, so that I would have more tools to deal with the side effects of it.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah,
and I keep telling myself, but any psychiatrist would say, and I tell my students as well when they're going on journeys in their life, is that everything you do, good or bad, makes you the person you become. I would not be in Vienna teaching had I not had these experiences.
Absolutely.
So therefore, would I give it up? No. I would hope that I would be friendlier and less competitive and less insecure about why I was where I am, because from the day one, 17 years old, conducting Brahms 3, I should not, by any definition, have been there. But I was, and I got through.
Yeah.
And instead of thinking, oh, I'm bluffing all the time, I should have just thought, okay, I'm here, and just calm down and learn and take, as I say, take the razor blades off of the elbows.
Well, I'm going to jump really a long way ahead, because I know we'll go back on assisting and on, guesting and also opera. But in 2004, you've mentioned it a couple of times now, your pupils. In 2004, you became professor of conducting at the University of Music and Performing Arts, Vienna, following on from people like Clemens Krauss, Hans Swarovski, whose name has appeared on this podcast many, many, many times. When you talk about assisting, so I'm sort of starting, with your current world and talking about your pupils. When you talk to your pupils about assisting, what advice do you give them about becoming an assistant or a mentor, or shadowing another big name conductor?
Because as you say, the three careers I've had: the assistant conductor, then the career conductor, and then the teacher. And right now, I identify more as a teacher than an actual professional conducting. I say on my gigs, but most of my life, especially since COVID, is now teaching.
Yeah.
And it's also where I found the Mark Stringer who is maybe the most genuine, and where I'm in my Zen place. There's just something about me that when someone else gets it, whatever that is, and I recognize my fingerprints on it, helping said person to get it, that almost is more euphoric and reduces me many times to tears than having done it myself. Okay, so your question was in 2001, teaching assistant, the project of teaching assistant. Okay, that project always involves being a great mimic. You have to be exceptionally smart to be a good assistant, a useful assistant at the highest level of the profession. We're not talking mid-conductor X, we're talking the Karyans, the Giulinis, the Clivers, the Gergievs of the world, the Tielemans of the world, and they do have their assistants. I tell them, first of all, always tell the truth. Tieleman, Cliver, Karyan needs from the assistant to hear the truth about what's going on. Now, don't bluff. Don't pretend that you know what you don't know. But in terms of balance, in terms of, are you convinced? Does it not work? Did this work better last night than before, or tonight, or whatever? No one needs to be ashamed about not having Karyan's experience or Giulini's experience. They need to hear the truth.
Absolutely.
That's what Simon respected me the most of. He said in front of the Vienna Philharmonic, he's the truth teller, because there was a very difficult spot with Anna Sophie Mutter in the Dvorak violin concerto second movement. You know, as a violinist, how tricky that piece is to balance. And Simon was trying to get them down, and he would turn back to me in the hall. I was there as in my professor role. I was just visiting. I was not assisting, but he trusted me. So we would turn around and say, "Do we got it yet?" And I would shake my head, "Nope." And they got to the spot where they were thinking it's good enough, and they turned around, and I still said, "Not yet. It's not goosebumps yet." And I said, "He's the truth teller." And so they did one notch more, and everyone went, "Oh yeah, that's where we should have been." So tell the truth. When you're looking at a person, famous conductor, whatever, and you're then knowing that famous conductor is going away and you have to do the rehearsals in their place. You have one chance usually to see what famous conductor is doing. If you're lucky, you have one chance. You notice everything. You mark it down. You don't leave anything to memory. You mark it down. But that won't help you imitate said person. You have to get into their mindset. You have to figure out, okay, why does conductor X make the chord position this way and not that way? Why is conductor X in 4 and not 2? Why is conductor X changing the score here? So you have to become their brain so that when you imitate them, you have a fighting chance of doing something vaguely recognizable.
And helpful to the process as well.
Of a long, bitter experience is do not try to imitate them physically. No, do the transitions, conduct in 4 where X is doing in 4, and that. But don't try to imitate them physically, because it will never work. You do your technique with the information you got from conductor X. So this is where, again, getting into the mindset, understanding why they're doing what they're doing, not what they're doing, but why they're doing what they're doing. Then you can translate that in to your own technique. This is also how you keep your own personality as a system. Don't become a copy of Karya, Julie, whatever. To do that, you have to be able to think on your feet at the speed of light. And you have to be willing, as well, to a certain moral point, to let's say it's like improvisation. There is no as an assistant conductor. There is a yes and. So when in our experience, I remember Macropolis case in Aix-en-Provence, and the tuba player, what was it? was that the tuba player who died of a heart attack, or did he just get sick? But there was a tuba player who dropped out from one performance, right, like 12 hours before a performance. Not enough time to get a replacement. They called around, and they were calling, because it's Aix-en-Provence, not the easiest spot to get to. They tried Munich, they tried Berlin, they tried everywhere in the world. They could not get a tuba player in Aix in time for the performance. So Simon called me up about 8 o'clock in the morning and said, look, this is what happened. Can you please figure out where the tuba is irreplaceable and reorchestrate so that we won't notice that the tuba is not played there. And we'll have a reading, a sound check at, let's say, 5 o'clock or something like that, and go through the spots that you've identified. And my job was to look at the score, analyze the score where the tuba player has to be playing, reorchestrate, so I had to have a knowledge of instrumentation, reorchestrate so that at the right octave, the notes are being produced that the tuba player had to play, write out the parts in a professional manner that the CBSO could deal with.
Yes.
So not scribbled on paper, but I actually, luckily, had a laptop computer, had Finale, and had a printer. And so I could write it on the Finale so that you had computer printed parts. So in other words, my job I had to do at a world-class level.
Yeah.
And have them on the parts, pasted into the music at the right moment, at the right spots, without any help. I didn't have an assistant. I had to do that.
Yeah.
And have it all on the stand on time for a 5 o'clock read-through. Right? Let's call it 5 o'clock. It might have been 6. At any rate, didn't have a whole lot of time.
No.
Didn't have any time to go to the bathroom or have any meal or anything like that. I just, you do not tell Simon Rattle, oh no, that's not physically possible, Simon.
No, you don't. No.
You say, true. Yes, okay, let me get it. Stop talking to me, let me get on this. You'll have the parts in time. And the CBSO had the parts in time. He did that rehearsal. He went from, I gave him a list of all the spots I changed. He just, boom, 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 boom. This is the life of the assistant. You don't say no, you jump. And so another instance was when Simon was doing Valkyrie recently, and he, was very apologetic. I know you're way older and did, but I need you to be on the Valkyrie team when I recorded it in Munich. I need you to be part of the team still because it's going to go so fast and I just need to have you by myself to tell me the truth. And I need you to do these rehearsals. So we had to have someone experienced enough to stand in front of the Bayerische Rundfunk and conduct them without breaking a sweat. This, at that point, no problem.
Yeah.
But then when they got there, they said, oh, bad news. There's no space for the Valkyries on the stage next to him, so he will not be able to see the Valkyries. So you're going to have to conduct the Valkyries in the concert and the recording, live recording. Okay, no problem. One day later, second day of rehearsal. Oh, bad news. They aren't going to be able to give you a stand with a light, so you won't be able to see anything. You're going to have to do it by memory. Can you do that? No, the Valkyrie scene. The head coach from the Vienna State Opera, who was also part of the team, I told him this, is that there's no way no one conducts the Valkyries because they have no idea where to point. Zubin Mehta told me he just basically throws his hands every couple of beats up into the air and he knows that someone will sing. He has no idea who sings what, whether it's Grimhilde or Grimgilde or Ortlind or Schmidt. I didn't tell Simon, oh no, that's not physics, that's not humanly possible. Not even Zubin Mehta or Karajan knows the Valkyrie scene by memory of actually who sings what, when, where. We all know the tunes, but we don't know who sings what, when, where. By memory. And so I said, Simon, fine, go. What I need, and so I went to the website because the Valkyries hadn't arrived yet. So I had no idea who these ladies were. I went to the website. I found press photos of all these singers. I photocopied them, pasted the face of the person singing the part next to their cues. So I didn't think about whether it's Schwertlinde or Ortlinde or something. I just saw, oh, the blonde soprano and the Jamaican soprano and the rather elderly alto and stuff like that. I just did it by faces.
Oh, that's ingenious.
Memorize the faces, memorize the cues, got through it.
Yeah.
You just don't say no. You just figure out a way to achieve the impossible, and then you feel really chuffed afterwards. So that's what I tell my students. And then I do projects with them where I will conduct a rather difficult transition with a piece with a difficult transition, and I'll conduct it once in front of them. And then they have to imitate me to the T.
Yeah, yeah.
I will do another piece. Let's say I have a student who has done a lot of work with historical instruments. So I'll take a piece of Mozart and conduct it very consciously like Klemperer. And then Mr. Harnoncourt here has to imitate Klemperer. Yes. And then I'll have some student who has not paid any attention to the HIP performance practice and thinks that Karl Böhm is the end-all and be-all of Mozart style, and I will then conduct Mozart in my most ridiculously over-Norrington way.
Yes.
And say, okay, you got to do that, and you got to be convincing.
Yeah, yeah.
You can't mock me. You can't turn your nose up it. You have to conduct it the way that I just conducted and convince the orchestra that that's the way you want to conduct it. And for some of it, it's an easy trick, and for some of them, they just don't get it, and those people will then not be asked by the Ivan Fischers or the Gergievs or the Tillemans of today's world to assist them. Going back, the most important thing, tell the truth. Yeah. Tell the truth with diplomacy, tell the truth with humor, find out the kinds of things that make various conductors laugh to reduce tensions. This saved me in a Bernstein recording session. Bernstein hated to make retakes of the video concert, the video portions.
Oh, yes.
The day after the quote live recordings, they had to go back onto the concert the day after in concert clothing with stage television lighting and do retakes. He loathed them, and he was in such a horrific mood, such a really pissy, really prima donna mood. And the Deutsche Grammophon team loved me. Hans Weber just adored me, his executive producer. Loved me because I knew Leonard Bernstein was an addict of British London Times crossword puzzles, which are real puzzles.
Yes, they are, yeah.
Find the clue. It's not synonyms like the American crosswords. It's puzzles. And I knew that Bernstein loved to be challenged and loved these crossword puzzles. So whatever recording notes that the Deutsche Grammophon team had for Bernstein, I would give to him. I'd put post-its in his score with all the notes from recording team reimagined as a London Times crossword puzzle clue. And you would see him pause. The orchestra had no clue what was going on, but suddenly Bernstein would just stop and look and break out into laughter and then give the right clue, right note, And Hans Weber just hugged me. He said, "Thank you. You were the first person to get him into a good mood in a recording session." This is one of the find out what makes certain conductors laugh and make them laugh during, not necessarily during rehearsals, but know how to lighten the mood. Yeah. When famous conductor Y is getting in a really, the storm clouds are, just lighten the mood. And be a team player.
Yeah.
Be a team player. Be Mr. Good Mood.
Yeah.
You're not there to create drama. You're there to release the drama that famous conductor is bringing into the room. So be Mr. Good Mood.
You mentioned, three, being an assistant, being the teacher, which we'll come back to again. I'm going to go to the middle bit, your career conducting bit. I see your name. You mentioned it earlier, working in Bern at the Opera House and Le Monet, where there was a famous, your first production there was very, very well received. Did you, or do you still prefer an opera production to a symphonic concert? Did you try and split it evenly between the two? And guesting, Did you enjoy guesting? Because not everybody enjoys guest conducting. Going in, putting the beat down, and not knowing what's going to come back at you, and different orchestras' attitudes. It's trying to potted history of your conducting career. Isn't that short, non-easy question? Sorry about that.
No. I like the. Also, for any student who might be, or young conductor who might be listening, which is sort of the point.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so let's think. I think at the end of the day, I started working with singers and coaching opera. To the end of my days, I think I'm always going to be a theater man. I love the teamwork. I love the work from building a production from beginning to end. I do not like the sport of jumping in without a rehearsal, which German opera houses like to do, or the biggest. That's not opera for me. That's. I want to scream at the audience, demand your money back, because this is not a well-seasoned theater experience. The people are not acting; they're just surviving, and the orchestra is not melding. They're just basically playing on a sort of autopilot that keeps them safe from any disaster.
Yes.
And the conductor is doing what conductor Y, and then before him, conductor X did, and then what before him, going back 70 years, that's how you did that transition. Yeah. That's not opera for me. But building a production from conceptual conversation from the stage director to final performance, that's where my blood really starts boiling positively. Trust me, I adore conducting every symphonic piece I've ever done. So it's not that I am not a symphonic conductor, but at the end of the day, if you force me at gunpoint, choose one or the other, I will definitely always choose the opera.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
How did I proportion it? The interesting thing, I have no control about that. I take the jobs that come to me.
Yes. Yeah.
And so there were periods where I was doing when I especially was engaged in an opera house, of course I was doing more opera than symphonic. Then I had a period where I was doing a lot more symphonic and the occasional, but always high level production at Teatro Real, the first production, Spanish performance of Cunning Vixen at the Teatro Real, Aix-en-Provence, La Monnaie, Appenort, blah, blah, blah. So the occasional, but always high profile, not in the provinces. And every time I was away too long from the opera pit, I was missing it terribly. And then when I'm doing a long production and I was away from the symphonic repertoire for too long, then I'd miss the symphonic.
Yeah.
But the career decides it for you. You don't decide, I'm now going to do 50-50. Yeah. Until you get to a certain level. But when you're a young conductor, your career happens. You don't make a career. Your career happens. Okay, so this is one thing. Then the next thing was, there are people who take to guest conducting, and there are people who take to competitions.
Yes.
Like ducks out of water. Ducks or ducks in water, I guess. That's their terrain.
Yeah.
And there are conductors who need to be a part of a team that they know, and they know the floor below, the ground beneath them very solidly. I was that person. I loathed guest conducting. I am not a person that's easy meeting people and dealing with people I don't know. There's something horrifically shy about me, and reserved about me. It's all going back to the imposter complex that I had as a student. I want to meet new people, but when it actually happens, I sort of get very shy. This is not conducive to a guest conducting career. I do not like walking into the room and not knowing whether we're going to have a common language to work from, or am I going to be constantly adapting, or the feeling was, sort of a fight or flight feeling sometimes.
Yes.
Not mentioning orchestra specifically, but gigs that went badly, there was a fight or flight feeling. It's not going the way I want. I don't feel any connection to this orchestra. They want something out of me that I do not want to give them. And how do I get to the end of this concert experience without being horrific? Finding some joy in the profession. if that happens too much, you can burn out. And I did have 2 moments of burnout. I mean, I just did not want to get in a plane anymore. One of them led to the conducting job in Vienna, the teaching job. I said, well, let me try this. The irony is I still live privately in Switzerland, so I commute to Vienna every week. I'm actually in a plane more often than I was when I was guest conducting, but I'm going to a home base. I'm going to a place that I know. I'm going to a team that I know and trust and love. And so it's exhausting, but doesn't rattle me. But you go to a new city, especially talking, for instance, Trondheim, which is one of my first major Norwegian things. I adore to this day that orchestra. So you get to a new country, new language. You don't know the culture. You don't know the restaurants. You don't know the city. The city is very often closed down when you get there late at night, and you're desperate for food. And you realize your best friend is McDonald's because you know on your very first night, you know what's on the menu and know how to order. And
been there, done that.
No. This is part of it. Speaking of the guest conductor life, I don't know a single male conductor. You think they're all cool and they're driving their Porsches and they're flying their planes and things like that. I don't know a single male conductor that's not an expert in sewing on buttons and knowing exactly all the tricks of how to iron wool clothing, like a tux or a tuxedo or a tails, or now everyone's wearing narrow jackets. But there are tricks of how to iron that. No one I know doesn't know exactly how to pick up an iron and do all the tricks. So Simon, I've seen ironing his clothes. So Daniel, I've seen the Howarding. I've seen ironing his clothes. I am an expert in sewing on buttons. You know, the things you don't think that the major maestros know how to do.
It's true.
That is life and death on the road. How to survive. Knowing what one of your questions is going to come up, I know at the end. What do you have to have in your baggage to survive? You know, and then never pack your music in your luggage. Make sure you have in your hand baggage exactly enough clothes to get you through the first day of rehearsal, because probably, especially if you're flying through Amsterdam, your luggage is not going to wind up with you.
That's true.
Dealing with that stress and knowing and learning. Another advice I give my students is, when you get your first agency, never forget to say thank you a lot. Because they are working their tail off for no hope of any financial reward for the first maybe 5 years. Just say thank you. Don't stress them. Don't be dramatic at them. My very first agency in Oslo, I didn't know that trick. And I left on bad terms with them. And I now look back and I said, I was not fair to them. They were really trying very hard. And if I just said thank you for what you're doing, maybe this doesn't work for me, but thank you, I might have left on better terms. So in the same way, I wish someone did, talking about England. I came to England from one of my very first really professional solo jobs at the CBSO. And people had not warned me about British humor. And way as we started out, you know, when you say, how are you doing? You're not expecting an actual answer. And you'll to hear the words, that was just really lovely, which probably in England means, oh my word, we've never experienced anything that horrific. They hadn't warned me about that, and they hadn't. Let's say, as an American, the highest compliment you can give an orchestra or music professional in America is tell them what you want, exactly what you want, in the most efficient terms. Thank you very much. Go. No time wasted. Please, thank you occasionally, but already that's 2 seconds that could be being played.
Yes.
Let's tell you what you want. Boom. Be very direct. That's the highest compliment in America. And someone should have told me, if you would just say, I'm so sorry, but could I bother you too? And then go into the American there. I might have gotten on with British orchestras quickly.
Or would you mind if I?
Sorry to be a bore, but the sort of slightly self-deprecating and use the word we as opposed to I, because British orchestras, there's a sense of identity. UK orchestras, excuse me. There's a sort of self-identity within the orchestra, and you are very much the guest in the room. I also tell my students, talking about guest conducting, treat guest conducting gigs as if you're coming to a dinner party at a great house. Your job is to bring a couple of really good bottles of wine and some fabulous conversation. Your job is not to rearrange the furniture in the house.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a brilliant
and that's again where I burned myself, because I tended to when I felt uncomfortable, I turned into a control freak, which is not necessarily the best way to deal with some orchestras.
No.
And so to round this back, I never felt comfortable as a guest conductor. I was always looking for home base. I was always looking for a team that I could feel a part of a family with. And if I didn't have that for too long, and I had the constant not knowing what to expect of feeling, I tended to burn out and get very stressed by the constant travel, the feeling of, in order to earn money, I have to get on the plane.
I have two small.
So one of my solutions was just to step back from the constant travel as a singular conductor, individual conductor, and tap into something I got from my very first mentors, Tilson Thomas and Bernstein. Not all the great repertoire I learned from them or all the tricks of the trade, but tap into that bit of both of those two people who communicated what they were doing to other people. Neither of them could study a score alone. They always needed someone at their side to have a conversation with about the score as they were studying. To study a score was to have a dialogue. To study a score was to share thoughts. And so they could not do it in a vacuum. They had to have someone to. That became my role in certain instances with MTT, and over the course of 5 years, increasingly to the point almost 24/7 with Bernstein, of the greatest experiences were not on the concert trail, not having 5 hours to change the Vienna Philharmonic bowings and the Beethoven Fifth Piano Concerto literally overnight and have them in the orchestra library on the stands for the next morning's recording session. And Bernstein doesn't give me his score until 2 in the morning, and I have to be at 9 o'clock in the morning at the library. Not that part of Bernstein. No, it was the Bernstein sitting at his study at his country home in Connecticut, learning the scores for the next season, and he would tell me, I'm looking at La Mer tomorrow. Come up to Connecticut, sit by me. You tell me everything you know about La Mer, and then I will tell you, Bernstein. I will tell you, Mark Stringer, everything I know about La Mer. In other words, I was not allowed into the room until I had something to offer Bernstein. Yeah. He wouldn't open his mouth with me until I put something on the table for him to look at. And then once that offering had been made, then it was a dialogue, a Socratic dialogue. Why do you think about this? Why do you think about that? What do you think about the Toscany reorchestrations? A dialogue. And by doing that, Bernstein was marking the score and thinking about it on himself. Yeah. Thoughts way higher than anything I had offered him. But my conversation was the motor for him to do his study. So I tapped into that bit of those two giants of the teacher, the teacher in MTT, and I suddenly found my Zen place, where I learned. I come to this podcast just having taught for 3 hours Shostakovich 9 for the 4th time in 2 weeks. And I started listening thinking, I am completely out of anything new to say. But it was also my most advanced class today. So they, again, by this point, after 4 or 5 years with me, they know they are not they must offer me something before. I do the same thing. Yeah. They have to offer me something before I start the dialogue. But my word, the things they were offering up, the ideas, the thoughts, so that we got onto this really long discussion about Akhmatova and the gulags and Solzhenitsyn, and then how do we translate that into Milosevic in the 90s and Donald Trump in Guantanamo Bay in America, and the far right extremism today. And so exactly the kind of conversation that as a 20-year-old or 24-year-old around Bernstein well into the night I would go out into the early morning of New York just buzzed with, oh my word, I just had a glimpse of something I had no idea I didn't know.
Yeah.
And sort of having that conversation. And by the end of it, I was realizing I had come to an understanding of a certain bit of the piece that I never imagined before, thanks to those students. And so I'm coming to this podcast on a real intellectual high. You can tell because I'm just gabbing. Because of what the students brought there. So I found my Zen place as a teacher. Where even if I'm traveling even more than before, I'm calmer than I used to be, and I'm happier than I used to be, and I can look at my students and say, oh, that's what I came off as. You know, when someone starts getting arrogant or something gets in pushy or someone says, they go, oh, that's how I looked, I seemed when I was doing that at the same age. Oh, how embarrassing. I got to tell this person to stop doing this or that. Yeah.
It sounds like a class I would thoroughly enjoy, because I love,
Except I know that you don't play piano. I've heard several of your podcasts, but I remember your comment to George Jackson, who was a student of mine.
Yeah,
and there's a slight difference of agreement. I know that in theory, I know it's completely possible that Kusevitsky was a great conductor and played only contrabass and barely read music and certainly didn't play any piano, and yet he was a world-class conductor. I know that theoretically exists. If someone studies with me, I need to have a basis piano technique so that they can at least score read and imagine multiple lines at the same time. And that's what pianists can bring to the room, is they have a inbuilt understanding of how to make 4 or 5 or 30 voices work at the same time in their fingers. And also pianists tend to be better at coming up with original conceptions of big structure pieces like the Hammerklavier or the late Beethoven sonatas or the Brahms Opus 5 sonata. You know, pianists deal with the big structure pieces more readily. Maybe I guess the next group would be the violinists who have the Beethoven sonatas and the Brahms sonatas to deal with. But in terms of, as a violinist, making a concept of the Kreutzer sonata or the Spring sonata that really works in an arch and an architecture. Where I find most orchestral players have a problem, who come out of the orchestra and have been given interpretations on the silver platter to them. They all want to do their own thing, but they tend to be a little bit Jackson Pollocky in their sense of architecture and how to make a piece work from beginning to end with one single arch. Because they've not had to come up with a structure on their own. And so I work most easily with conductors who have a basis piano technique.
Well, I mean,
most conductors need to have a professional ability on one instrument, and then a working knowledge of at least one of every type of instrument. A brass instrument, a woodwind instrument, or a string instrument, or a piano instrument, or a keyboard instrument. A working knowledge, so that you know what it feels like to have the violin buzzing against your. I could not stand playing the violin because the sound was way too close to my ear, so I wound up being a contrabass player and a trumpet player. Still remember how my lips hurt after buzzing for way too long in one day. So I know how that feeling is, and I know how to breathe, and I know how to sing. Which is the most important thing as a conductor, to learn how to sing, learn how to use your diaphragm, learn how to breathe, how to support your voice, how to project your voice, and then you can work with singers on their level. So I remember defending the rights of non-pianists to become conductor. Long may they live. There are lots of them, but a basic C major da dee da bum ba da bum piano sonata level really helps.
I'm sure it does. I will argue slightly backwards or back against you and say that, if I sit down at a score, I'm going to look at the architecture properly from start to finish. I have also, had to go at a few instruments and also chatted to my colleagues. The piano thing is indefensible. I never took it up. I never learnt it. And when I was 14, I wanted to be an orchestral violinist, period. But, as you said, we are products of our lives. And at some point in my mid-20s, I wanted to change and become a conductor, especially by the time of the age of 35. Therefore...
Where you have an advantage over young pianist Mark Stringer entering Juilliard as an orchestral player. Any orchestral player has this advantage. First of all, you're going to be much more sensitive to intonation than I am. Pianists can do wonderful intonation, but they tend to be less sensitive about where beats are in the waves and where the overtones are than violinists and oboists. String players, that's it. I will say a violinist and cellist tend to be even more sensitive than violist and bassist. Okay, please bring on the cries of protest. I welcome them. But no, and you know how to work in a team, and you listen to other people actively better than many pianists do. And by what I mean active listening is like a first violinist in a string quartet. The first violinist is sort of leading and guiding the string quartet through Opus 132 or whatever. But it is a weird sense of improvisation that you're just listening mad and listening to this impulse from the cellist and listening to that impulse from cello, and let's see where it goes in this way. Orchestral players tend to do that better than pianists, who tend to be no man is an island unto himself. Yeah, nice. It tends to be the island unto the anti-John Donne. And so that's where you have more sensitivity just on a very basic musical level. And I've had lots of conversations with various string players in various countries of various theories. If you just take a simple triad, major triad, how loud should the fifth be and how loud should the third be? Should the third be louder than the fifth, or should the third be softer than the fifth? And in Vienna, they tend to want the third to disappear into the chord. But I've had also in America, people who argue exactly the opposite. I just love that dialogue, that nerd dialogue. Orchestral musicians tend to be better than that. I've noticed brass players or wind players tend to hear every wrong intonation in the wind section and be totally deaf to the strings. And string players can tune the microtones till you start screaming with the string section, but be utterly oblivious whether the piccolo is higher or lower than the bass clarinet.
Yeah.
And so part of my job is to rag on all my students. I say, to be the complete conductor, you have to be able to do both of those worlds quickly.
Well, I have
no excuse for being a pianist. Yeah.
I have one final question, which if you've listened to a few episodes, which it sounds like you have, you'll know that I ask or have asked every conductor. And I wonder whether you teach this to your students in Vienna. And it's about score study, but also it's really about score marking. When you come to learn a score, I'm assuming you sit at the piano. Do you start with the bigger overall picture and work inwards? Do you start at the beginning and work your way through? And are you a scribbler? Are you a red, blue, and black pencil person? And when you teach, do you say to them, you're holding, I know exactly which make of pencil it is. And when
that's the answer to the question of what do I have to take on my travels?
Yeah, right. Red and blue pencil. When you come to teach this, do you prescribe something, or do you let them find their own way? Because I think the answer has come over 90 odd episodes now, where everybody does it their own way. But how do you do it, and how do you teach it?
Love your questions, and I hope you have some time.
I have.
You're going to have to edit this down, but this will take time. Okay. You started off at how do I study the score, and you assumed that I started at the piano. Not necessarily.
Okay.
Not necessarily. Very often, if you're on the road, you don't have a piano.
No, that's true.
That's the thing. You don't always have access to a piano. For me, it's a luxury if I have the ability to learn the score at the piano. If it's an opera, I start with the text alone.
Mm.
I learn the text like an actor by memory.
Mm.
No musical conduct. As an actor by memory, I can cite from beginning to end, Parsifal or whatever it is in the moment that I'm doing. 2 days later, I can't do it, but in the moment, I can start from beginning and recite the text by memory. As an actor, feeling the words, feeling the rhythm of the words. Then I go, that's where I learned the score at the piano, is I coach it to myself as a singer.
Mm.
If it's a symphonic score or a non-operatic score, I have a good enough ear that I don't need the piano to learn the score. I do score read well enough that I can score read fluently. So where the piano is useful for me is just experimenting with phrasing, experimenting with balances, experimenting with this and that, not necessarily to learn the piece. Yes, I will listen to every available recording. First of all, when I first get the gig, recordings and YouTube is a great thing, right? The day that an agent or an intendant will be asking you, we want to do this piece there, what do you think about that? Well, I immediately get a working knowledge of the piece as quickly as I can, so I know where the problems are, what to expect in rehearsals, not really even having a score in front of it, but just have a clue of, oh, this piece is going to be difficult for this reason or not. Instantly. And then I'm on my own, and then I'll come back. Once I have it in my ear and my body and my brain, then I'll come back and listen to every available recording from the dawn of Edison cylinders to find out what works. I'm a big magpie. I will steal any good idea possible. How much do I mark up a score? I learned a certain scores marking technique from Bernstein. I found, again, circling back to the assistant conducting thing, one of the things I found very useful with Bernstein was to mark my score exactly the way he marked his score, so that I had a working copy in my score of what he had in his score.
Yeah.
And it just became much more efficient if instead of using my colors, I used his colors. And that's where I discovered the holy red and blue pencil. And the older I get, the less I mark. Very often, if it's been away from me for 5 or 6 or even 10 years, I will want a new, fresh score and learn it from scratch with no markings. The older I get, the less I mark. The worse my eyes get, the bigger the scores, and the more I actually want to see the notes I'm conducting. I know the scores by memory, but I have a score in front of me because it never impresses me to see someone conducting by memory, nor do I think it impresses anyone in the orchestra if I'm conducting by memory. It's not impressing anyone, so why take the risk of making a mistake?
I've always called it a parlor trick, personally, for my playing days.
People say, "Oh, I feel so much freer not having the stand in front of me. I might hit the stand." And I say, "Well, if you're hitting the stand, you're conducting too long."
Yeah, that's true.
Being a smart teacher, a smart ass teacher. Okay, so back to score study. One of the big things I teach in Vienna is not only technique and not only rehearsal psychology and all the things I've learned from all my great mentors.
Yeah, I
have a score study method that I teach. It's a Socratic method. It's about marking scores. I don't get involved with. Everyone has their own system. I don't get involved.
Yeah.
I also don't insist that my students study the way I study, because everyone has their way into it, and I respect that. I want, at the end of the day, at the end of the process, we all know the score like we had composed it ourselves. I tell my students, you are no longer, whatever your name is, you're not that person anymore. You are Ludwig van Beethoven on the podium. That's your composition. Those are your ideas, and you are composing it on the spot. You are taking responsibility for every idea you have. So my goal is to get whatever person to that part. I will say, this is how I do it. If you can deal with this, fine. If you can't do with it, I expect the same result, but the means, that's your business. Yeah. Okay, my means is I ask, and I learned this from Tilson Thomas, credit where credit is due. I've developed my own system, but I got this from Tilson Thomas. The 4 holy questions. What is there? Why is it there? What makes it special? How does it work?
Brilliant.
What is there is you're looking at it as an analysis. That's where you do the harmonic class. Is it horn in F? Is it horn in C? Is it what's tempo? Black and white, what is on the page? Because the ear, if it's a piece that we know from other performances or know for a long time, the ear can trick the eye into seeing what the ear wants to hear.
Very true.
And therefore, the first question is to turn off the ear and just look at the score. What is there on the page? Black and white. No context, just black and white. Analysis, harmonic analysis, instrumentation, tempo, all these things. Question number 2, you're looking at it like a composer. Why is it there? Why does Brahms go to this chord and not that chord? Why does Johann Strauss always use trumpets in F and not trumpets in B flat? Why this? Why that? This is where you take apart the Swiss watch and then rebuild the Swiss watch. Another metaphor I often use. And this is where you make every decision your own. You know why Bach goes in this direction and not in that direction. And one of the tricks that I like to do at home, and then that I'll occasionally ask the students, okay, behind every great genius composer that we know now, how many hundreds of years later, there is always the sort of mid-level apparatchik composer. So Mozart had his Salieri,
yes,
who was horrifically underestimated, but let's say Mozart had his Salieri, Bach had his had his Mattheson, and Shostakovich had Kandikov, and Brahms had Joachim Raff. Everyone has their mid-level no name. So what would Salieri do in the next measure? Now let's look at what Mozart did, or let's look at what Haydn did. Let's compare Haydn to Mozart. What makes Haydn and not Mozart? What makes Schubert and not Beethoven? Next question, what makes it special? You're looking at it as a historian. This is where you do all the deep dive intellectual work. You put it in its historical context. You put it in its societal context. You ask the question, okay, why is it a masterpiece? What makes it a masterpiece? Why do I have to, every few years, deal with Brahms 4 or Mozart G minor symphony? The other piece I taught this morning was the Haydn 102 B flat major symphony. If I don't deal with that particular symphony about once every year, I miss it terribly. So what is it about that symphony that I don't get from the brother of Haydn? Or Hummel, the pupil of Mozart, or Ries, the pupil of Beethoven? Why do I not miss anything by Ries? But if I don't every once in a while think about, okay, what makes the Appassionata tick? Then I feel or Eroica Symphony, I feel very, very lessened as a human being. Okay, so that's your historian. Finally, once I've dealt with it as a historian, as an analysis, as a composer, as all these other hats, only then do I start thinking of like a conductor. Now, heaven help me if I go in front of the CBSO and I haven't figured out whether I'm going to be in 4/2 and how I do this transition and how do I tune this chord, so, the nuts and bolts.
Yeah.
But my problem is so many conductors start there at the end of what my process is and think the other questions are too much work. I don't think, I just insist if you want to be world class, the concept of taking shortcuts doesn't exist. It's not in my dictionary. Now, realistically, if I get 12 hours to learn Et Expecto Resurrectionem of Messiaen, I'm still going to be asking the questions. I'm just going to be asking them at the speed of light.
Yes.
Going on gut instincts. The older I get, the more I trust my gut. I think all of these questions tend again to come from the imposter complex. Well, I have to defend my right to be here, so I'm going to over prepare like mad. The older I get, the more I trust my gut. I'm good enough. It's not that I don't have to do the homework. I want to do the homework because I like doing it, but I'm not going to be a better musician having done it. However, if I had 12 hours to do Et Expecto, Of course, my one and only job is to organize the score. Hello, red and blue pencil. Organize the score in such a way that I could basically look at it and see the blocks of it and sight read it in front of the orchestra without making mistakes. Yeah. This is my first 12 hours at something as horrifically complex as, shaker loops or whatever,
Yeah.
However, I'm also being able to do et expecto because I now have a backlog of experience in Stravinsky and other pieces of Messiaen and Millot, and I know the language. I have a backlog of experiences to sort of on the fly answer question 2 and 3.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
It's not that I'm shrinking it. And I always say, if I have 12 hours to learn the piece, it takes me 12 hours. If I had 12 years to learn the piece, it takes me 12 years. The end result in the concert is not going to be wide apart from one another.
So what you're saying is you can change the order of the questions.
Definitely. It's a constant circle, and I'm constantly asking the questions. Every single time I look at the piece. That's one of the reasons I like getting new scores. I'm on something like my 5th score of the Brahms 4, and certainly my probably 8th score of something like Brahms 1 or something like that. These pieces are always coming back to me. I just like being confronted with the new print. I love getting the newest critical edition, not because it's the newest one is always the best one. It just gives me a different visual feel for the piece, so I'm not working off of photographic memory. But and every once in a while, the new print. Oh, I never noticed that there was a staccato there. I never noticed that this was a diminuendo there, or something like that. So that, in a long, big mama of a nutshell, is the way I teach how to score study. And I say this, I'm going to be asking my teaching, I'm going to be asking you these questions. So you're going to have to deal with it on some form or another. But if that doesn't work for you, you find your own way, but don't take shortcuts. I will call you out if I sense that you're just dealing on the surface and you're just imitating some recording. I will call you out on it.
Absolutely.
I will make it very embarrassing for you if I sense you taking shortcuts, then I will call you out on it. But what your path to Rome is, we're all going to arrive in Rome, but there are many roads to Rome.
Another topic we discussed was how and why he had helped Daniel Harding with his conducting in the middle of Daniel's career. You may remember way back in episode 11 that Daniel openly discussed this, and it seems that many conductors have asked Mark to do a Daniel for them. I've turned that 17-minute discussion into a Patreon-exclusive bonus mini-episode. There is a link in the show notes below that will take you to my Patreon page, and there you will find 6 different levels of subscription, starting from as little as £5 a month. Now, the all-important 10 questions with my guest, Mark Stringer. Mark, it's that moment of the podcast. 90 or so episodes in, I'm still asking these same 10 questions, and you will be no different. And I start with, what sound or noise do you love, and what sound or noise do you hate?
So the sort of noise that I love are children laughing.
Yeah.
And this is personal. Where I live in Switzerland, we're directly across the street from a kindergarten. We live in a very, as Germans say, multicultural, a very intercultural neighborhood. So this is a playground where Tamils, forgive me in English if that's the wrong word.
Tamil is Sri Lanka.
Yeah, exactly. Sri Lankan, Turkish, Muslim, Christian, Jewish, they're all there. They're all laughing on the playground. They're all not seeing any difference between them. They're just having fun together. Racism is a learned quality and not an inborn quality. And this is the example of it. You go to a kindergarten, the kids are playing very happily. They don't know that they're supposed to be mistrusting the people who don't look like them. And to hear that, especially on a summer day, and I'll be studying at my desk, and suddenly, when playtime comes at the kindergarten, suddenly I hear this roar of children laughing. It just, no matter how gray the day might be, it just brings sunshine into my life.
Yeah, Yeah.
The sound I hate, basically big city noise. Street cars honking, jackhammers drilling, loud noise. City. I could never live in New York ever again. It's just too aggressively loud for me.
If you had 24 hours free, what would you spend it doing?
Now, the embarrassing and truthful answer is, the one quality I share with Carlos Kleber is I'm very happy just being a tomato in a garden doing absolutely nothing. And so that's the embarrassing thing. I would love to say that I'm going to spend my day reading Tolstoy and Oliver Twist in 24 hours. Not going to happen. If I have a day where I have nothing planned, if the weather permits, I will spend a lot of that day out in the garden. I am a passionate gardener. We're going to come back. I think that question comes up later, right? I'm a passionate gardener. I will definitely be playing with my cat. I'm a cat fanatic. And this comes back to doing nothing, but there's something very Buddhist about it. I just love being really, really quiet. I don't have to be even reading because that's noise in my head. Yes. I'm reading the book. Just being quiet. Other people will call it vegetating. Other people will call it zoning out. I'm calling it just, can't do it for very, very long, but I just love going to a very still part of myself. So there will be, it's not meditation really, it's just going quiet. And then there is endless amount of rabbit holes on YouTube. I'm embarrassing.
Come on, Mark, we've all been there.
I've given up pretending that I'm a deep intellectual, and I've stopped being embarrassed because I cannot discuss arcane Japanese poetry with Simon Rattle. I've just given up being embarrassed by that. And since Simon says, well, he's actually very embarrassed by this statement. He admits saying it, but he's embarrassed by it. But I will repeat it. Any conductor who has not read Dr. Faustus is not worthy of the name conductor. And so, well, I know Daniel Hawkins is the same thing. I've tried many times in many languages to read Dr. Faustus. I find it exceptionally boring. I guess I'm not a conductor. I've given up trying to impress people that I'm intellectual. I do love reading, but I'm not necessarily out to read the complete works of Dostoevsky anymore.
Can you name your favorite conductor or conductors of yesteryear?
Okay, yesteryear would be, they tend to be, you'll notice, fairly Germanic. The conductor that not many people know the name of anymore, but is vastly important in German culture is Fritz Steinbach.
Well, I don't know this name.
Hofkapelle, Brahms's favorite conductor. Enormously influential until he basically put Brahms's orchestral music on the map.
Wow.
And people forget that until maybe 1920, Brahms was considered an outlier and an avant-gardist, and was not that well known by orchestras. And Fritz Steinbach conducted for Brahms many times, was the leader of the Meiningen Hofkapelle, and he was the great proselytizer for Brahms after Brahms died. Cycles, and first Brahms cycles in London, first Brahms cycles in Munich, in Berlin. And very influential, huge supporter of Gustav Mahler. The first performance of Mahler 8 after Mahler's own performance. One of the first performances of Mahler 5, Mahler 2. So in Cologne, vastly important Germanic conductor who unfortunately had a Me Too experience at the Cologne Conservatory, dilly-dallying with a female student, and so shockingly, for 1914, was fired from the job and erased from the planet for that, and had a heart attack shortly. So Steinbach fascinates me. Massive Furtwängler fan, fanatic. Massive Leopold Stokowski fanatic about what he could do. He and Karajan.
Yeah.
of what they could do in terms of getting colors out of an orchestra.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I mentioned Karajan. Of the great ones of yesteryear, bizarrely not Bernstein, it's Karajan that I miss the most, of the ultimate commander of the art of conducting. And more recently, well, I will have to now add, since a couple of weeks ago, I have to add another name to the list, but Harnoncourt,
Yeah.
whom I knew personally, desperately miss him on the scene. The only one after Karajan and Bernstein to have that kind of mega Frank Sinatra charisma on the stage.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sir Simon's the first one to admit the same thing.
Yeah.
He's the only one who could, just by walking onto the stage, the audience would go into a frenzy. So I desperately miss Harnoncourt, and of course now we have to talk about yesteryear Sir Bernard.
We do, yes, yeah.
We have to.
We do.
When I compared this statements, he was still alive, and so since then I just suddenly, if I don't mention Sir Bernard, I'm not worthy of my title of conductor.
Brilliant choices.
Someone in the simplest way, to the end, what physical he had in his 90s. One of the last London Symphony performances, I think, if not the last London Symphony performance, there's a film of him, Mozart E-flat Major Concerto with Till Feldner, and just watching him conduct the most simple, beautiful three-timer without the slightest old man quiver to his stick, but like an old, late Dali painting, reduced to the bare essentials of what's necessary. But boy, you can say about the same thing about Blomstedt, but Blomstedt is the youngest old man I've ever met. He's had a life a long time. So, okay, so.
Well, maybe Blomstedt.
To your next question.
Or maybe Blomstedt is one of the answers to question 5. So, who would be your favorite current conductor?
Well, the obvious answers, of course, one of the reasons I enjoyed working with Daniel Harding and studying and working with and for Sir Simon Rattle is I'm their biggest, apart from their own parents, I'm their biggest fans. So I have to mention those two specifically. And we have mentioned Blomstedt.
Yes.
Of female conductors, this is a whole other topic. I think Natalie Stutzmann is the real thing. I mean, she is as brilliant technically, in terms of command of an orchestra, in terms of sheer conducting technique. She is so much the real thing. There's a new conductor that, and I'm going to mangle his name, I discovered him through Joyce Donato and Il Pomodoro, but there's a young Russian conductor, Maxim, please help me with the name, Emelyannichev. I don't know how to pronounce his name, but by God, is he interesting.
Yeah, he conducted at the proms this year, and I think he did 39, 40, and 41, I think, did he?
Yes, again, I have actually met him, but it was, I didn't know I was meeting him. It was sort of like wrong context, wrong city, I didn't until he had passed me, I realized who he was. He was just, he'd come to a graduation concert of my students because he knew one of the students conducting. And he came up to me and said the nicest things to me, and that's another thing. And I was nodding and saying, "Oh, thank you so much," and pretending that I knew who was talking to me. And then like 10 minutes, like, "Oh, my word, that was Maxime." Oh, I had so many questions for him, but wrong context, wrong time. Didn't know I was meeting him. I hope I will meet him again and know, not blank out. And he's just sensationally. There's just recently a video of him conducting Handel's Theodora with Joyce Donato, and I'm just looking and said, he's the music. I don't see the conductor. He's the music, I think that's enough for right now. Telemann and Wagner, but pretty much reduced to that.
What is the hardest work you've ever conducted?
Okay, I've listed 4. 2 of them are technical and 2 of them are musical. Magnus Lindberg, Arena 2. It's a competition piece that he wrote for, I think, the Padula competition. Don't quote me on that. It's just 10 minutes of sheer terror of the fastest multimeter time beating. And this is, by the way, speaking there, this is where I learned a trick about something about myself. Sir Simon had always told me as a student at Tanglewood, the one thing an orchestra will never forgive you for is miscounting. Because they look bad. They sound bad because you miscounted. That's the one mistake even Sir Simon said with the CBSO. When he, the 1 or 2 times in the 20 years he miscounted, the orchestra took a long time before they forgave him for it. Okay, so I tell my students about this. It was Arena 2 where I figured out I make the mistake when I start analyzing what I've heard and start thinking backwards and past tense of what I want to correct. That's where I make the mistake in terms of beating. Because I asked, why was the concert actually really easy for me, but the rehearsals were hell? Oh, because I was thinking in the past tense opposed to the future tense.
It's the 110-meter hurdler.
Find a safe place, take a note, build up your RAM capacity, find a safe place to stop, and you won't miscount. But don't think backwards, just keep thinking. So the Arena 2 taught me that. I must say the hardest opera I've ever conducted would be Lulu.
Yes.
With Ligeti's Grand Macabre being a really close second.
Yeah.
Now, in terms of musical, you're going to be shocked because this, for so many pieces, this is the easiest piece in the world. I've never, ever conducted a good performance of The Afternoon of a Fall. I just find the balance of give and take, classical structure opposed to romantic, diaphanous, the tiny adjustments of the steering wheel as you're driving down the highway. It's not big, huge jerks of the steering wheel. The tiny, microscopic adjustments of the steering wheel in that piece. I have yet to come out of a performance where I think that was not bad. That hasn't happened yet. I'm desperate. If I cared more, I would be embarrassed by it. But now I'm too old, and I said, okay, that's a piece that other people do better than I do. And intellectually, I will always say that Beethoven 9 remains the toughest climb uphill to Mount Everest. I will always be deeply humbled by any attempt that I've ever made at that piece. I'm getting better at it, but making the slow movement work as an arch, making the slow movement work within the bigger arch, making the huge double variation in the last moment work. I love Simon's comment that the piece starts big and gets smaller as it goes along. Oddly enough, the biggest movement in terms of people on stage is actually just basically the magic flute on steroids. The first movement is titanic. So I'm finding my way into it. I've had a couple of goes at it, and I'm very humbled by it. And so that's musically the hardest piece.
When traveling abroad to conduct, what item could you not leave home without?
Okay. I would definitely say, well, to not cheat on your answer, I'll say books, but now, of course, it's my Kindle. I have to have reading material. If I don't have reading material, I can't go to my quiet, still place on a plane.
Yeah, indeed.
I have to have something to distract me from the fear of this thing is lifting me up into the air and it could explode in any minute. So I have to have my book to distract myself.
Number 8. What is the one thing you would change about being a conductor?
Already talked about it, the traveling bit of it.
Yeah.
The current profession, which I am now too old to really understand, the social media aspect of it, the requirement of having a social media presence, I think dreadfully. I keep saying Karajan didn't have Twitter. He didn't wind up being a really bad conductor, and he could sell himself. And I think a lot of it's just distraction, but so social media, traveling. In terms of the other more metaphysical thing, and we've talked about it before with my shyness of meeting people, the adversarial relationship between orchestra players and conductors.
Oh God, yes.
I'm in a strange city. I don't know anyone. I'm not begging for mercy, and I'm not begging for you to forgive me being a stupid conductor. However, the thought that you're not allowed to talk to the conductor, or the conductor is not allowed to socialize on any level with the players, I find just desperately sick. The one orchestra where the orchestra went out of its way to make sure that I was around people and had company was in really North Sweden, Umeå. And it was in the middle of winter, in the the white nights, or the black nights, where the sun doesn't come up.
Yeah.
And it was snowing, and they knew that they were a tiny city that's not basically on anyone's radar. Really good orchestra, tremendously good orchestra. But what I loved about them is they went out of the way to invite me to dinner. They went out of the way to take me home to their family and have, that they knew how gray that city is if you don't know anyone in it. And I will always treasure that orchestra because they saw me as a human being and not as an adversary. And so that I would love. And I must say, it is getting better. Brass players worldwide are less like New York taxi cab drivers than they used to be. And I think, the one bit of advice I always give my students, and I learned from, again, good experiences, don't psychoanalyze the orchestra in front of you. If they're being aggressive, it's not always about you. Sometimes, I remember in Bern, there was an older oboist, and I was a really young conductor in 27, 28. And he would always look at me with a scowl and just be the most horrific humor and send back nasty comments but basically just sit there with his oboe scowling the whole time. And I thought he hated me. And at one point, about maybe 2 years into my job there, I just asked the principal flutist, whom I got on well with, what's his problem? And he said, oh, no, he really likes you. He thinks you're very interesting. He has terrible hemorrhoids. He's sitting on hemorrhoids in constant physical pain, and that's why he's sitting there scowling. And that's where I learned, don't psychoanalyze the orchestra. Don't give the aggression any amount of thought. I mean, be honest. And sometimes it is bloody obvious that they're going against you. Yeah. But it's not always about you. So don't get in their brains. Just do your job and deal with it. But I would love for orchestras to treat conductors as human beings, and conductors, treat orchestra musicians with respect of what they're doing is also really bloody difficult. Just be a little bit more humble and not slap their hand the entire time.
What profession other than your own would you like to attempt? I have a feeling the garden's going to be involved.
Gardener is something earlier. I mean, I seriously thought at one point, one of my burnouts to take a professional course in gardening and do this professionally. Thank God I didn't, but because I don't like bad weather. But I adore gardening. The other thing, and my partner and I have talked about this quite a lot, of what would we do if we ever retired and wanted to. I'm opening a rescue pet center, working with animals, and there's something in me, the opera person, that always regretted and always dreamed in my fantasy life of being an actor, not a musician, being an actor. Especially improvisation. And even though I've never done it, I watch on YouTube improvisation troupes and things like Mischief Theater obsessively. And I tell my students, if you get the opportunity to, as a hobby, join an improv course, I think the yes and bit of improvisation as an actor really, especially in terms of conducting concerti, accompaniments, operas, the yes and approach of improvising with another great mind, not necessarily coming in with any. It's hard. Yes, you have to come up with the idea. You have to be a partner on the stage with Stephen Nisselis or whoever. I mean, they demand. As Anya Celia once told me, the great German soprano, yes. She needed to have a sense of she needed a sense of resistance from the conductor, something for her to push against.
Right.
I love that concept. It's not aggressive pushing you back, but she needed to feel an energy from the conductor that then she could push back against. In other words, like a tennis game. Yeah. And the concept of being open to anything that's thrown at you and deal with it and then make something positive out of it. I would think an improv course for young conductors could be only beneficial. So I would love to be on a stage, and I remember talking about Sir Willard, about his experience, Willard White,
Yes.
Sir Willard White, about his experience doing Othello, not Otello, Othello with Trevor Nunn. And the hardest thing he said is suddenly he had no composer to work with. He had his own composer. He had no one telling him the timing. He had to come up with the timing of how to deliver a sentence.
Yeah.
And he found that, and I would just love to have explored that if I were younger and more energy than I have now.
And finally, Mark, if the world were to end tonight, what would be your choice of final meal and drink?
Okay. A very personal answer. Two answers. So I don't expect anyone to relate to this, but this is very personal answer. My grandfather on my mother's side, my grandfather every 4th of July would have a barbecue.
Ooh.
And because it's an early childhood memory, I still smell, taste his barbecue sauce. I mean, probably if I came to it as an adult from the outside, I'd find it probably dreadfully overcharred. But as a young kid who knew nothing, that became a really treasured taste in my mouth. It meant home, it meant comfort, it meant my grandfather. So I want to have one of his barbecues. And my father could, in the same way, could make a what Americans call sloppy joes. Germans call it, I think, pulled pork.
Mm-hmm.
But in America, it's called sloppy joes. And he had just his own special recipe. And again, we grill it, and this is a childhood memory, and it just means home for me. So those two meals I won't have tomorrow, especially since in 2 days it will be the year anniversary of my father dying, and so I do think about that quite a lot.
Well, I'm sure you would, and it's a difficult time for you.
So good luck linking with that. I'm desperate.
No. What I will say is, as somebody who is a lover of barbecue sauce, I put it on things that it really shouldn't be on, Mark. I know exactly why you would choose that. And I know, for instance, I'm going to probably order my takeaway for my tea, and it will be covered in barbecue sauce.
But there is a slight, now to pretend to be intellectual, there's a Proustian thing about that, about how the Madeleine suddenly opens up thousands of pages of memory about history, but it's just the taste of the Madeleine dipping into the tea. My grandfather's barbecue sauce, my father's sloppy joe, opens up a world of memories. It's not necessarily about the taste.
It's the memories.
But I instantly can go back to that spot and taste the barbecue in my mouth. And taste the sloppy joe. So pardon me for being a bit sloppily romantic and sentimental, but that has to be my answer. I could care less about going to a 5-star restaurant again in my life.
Look,
I would like to, but as long as someone else is paying. But that's not what will send me off into the next life, shall I say?
Looking back on the memories of your recently deceased father and your grandfather, food is the sort of thing that can do that. And memories are something I'm going to have with this chat, because you've delved all the way back into your memories and told me so many amazing and fascinating things that I know the listeners are going to love. And one day I hope to do it again soon, and one day I hope to come and watch you teach in Vienna. Whether I ever asked for a stringer to my technique in the future is another thing. But thank you, Mark, and I hope to meet you very soon.
I've enjoyed it thoroughly. My word, the questions are just, again, sorry for babbling, sorry for going on, but that's what happens when a student or a colleague like you gives me a great intellectual question to hang my hat on. Okay, watch me go. So good luck in editing this to distant lengths, but I've enjoyed it enormously. Thank you so much. I love your podcast.
A Mic on the Podium was devised and produced by Michael Seal, with music by Ben Dawson. Next time, I chat with a Spanish conductor who spent 7 years as a professional percussionist before becoming the assistant conductor of the CBSO in 2018. He's also been the associate conductor of the Oboist Orchestra in the Basque Country and is the principal guest conductor of the Orchestra Sinfonica di Milano in Italy. But until then, bye-bye.